Welcome to the Parent Guide to GCSE podcast. Today's guest is the remarkable James Shone, who, having nearly become a head teacher, now shares with us how he helps to inspire confidence in every individual. Okay, good morning, James. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, absolute pleasure. It's an honour to be with you.
So, let's start at the very beginning. I can and I am. How did you arrive on the name? Where did it come from?
Do you know it? Yeah. So I mean, the story is that I was a teacher, and I was just been appointed to become a head teacher, and as a result of the job, I had a medical, and the medical uncovered a huge brain tumour, two large operations, the second one leaving me without my sight. And that meant that I couldn't take up the job of being a head teacher. So I found myself with 4 young children, a wife, with no job. We didn't know we were going to live because we thought we were going to go into a headmaster's house. And that was quite a scary time. And I was hugely weakened by not being able to walk or talk properly. I had a little sort of high-pitched whimper because of my tracheostomy. And I remember a man who's actually a sort of life coach asking me when I was sitting in my white chair, honestly, like a sort of 95-year-old person in the last days of their life. And he said to me, James, what's your passion? And I think that's such a brilliant question, because physically I was ready for the scrap heap. It was game over. I couldn't walk, I couldn't really talk, I couldn't do anything. But as he asked that question, it kind of searched me to the soul, and I was still there. And in the end, after 2 or 3 weeks of a similar question, I was able to say my passion is to see young people believing in who they are and what they can do. And that's followed on with the name of I Can and I Am. So that was the start. And I remember him looking at me just straight in the face and just said, let's do it. And I thought, let's do what? I'm just sitting here in my dressing gown, dribbling and falling in and sleep. And that was the start, and it was hard to imagine that the journey was going to begin, but it has begun, and it's kept going. Yeah.
So, I mean, you had your surgery in 2012?
That's it, yeah.
And took, what, a year or so to get yourself back on your feet? Or?
Well, but yeah, it's probably about a year. I mean, back on my feet, but I mean, I've had 2 small strokes. I've lost 90% of my sight, so nothing in my left eye, about 10% here in my right eye. And I'm still hugely weakened. I mean, there's so many things that I can't do, but it was about, I certainly didn't work in any way between 2012 and 2013 academic year. And then it was the beginning of 2014, I did my first 1 or 2 presentations. And at that stage, I would go and do a presentation. It would take me about 2 weeks to get over it. I was so exhausted. And so at the Easter term of 2014, I think I did 3 school visits. And gradually, as time has gone on, it's a bit like a snowball. I've sort of done more and more.
In those 6 years, you've been very busy by the looks of things.
Yeah, I mean, I've had all sorts of extraordinary, very, very diverse groups of people that I've spoken to, and places. I've travelled to South Africa. I've travelled to Australia. I've done all sorts of different stuff.
You've been booked to speak in Australian schools, and they go there.
Well, they paid for my school talks, but I paid for my flight. Okay. But by the time I'd been to 10 or 12 schools, I'd covered my flight.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you do your speeches, is it generally to parents, or is it more to?
It's to pupils, parents, and I do staff inset to staff as well. Yeah.
In fact, when I was researching you, I read with interest about the staff inset, because I think with the 30 years of staff inset between us, it is the thing that I think we struggle with most. One, because it's generally the first day of a term, and two, it's probably the dullest day of a term. So getting...
Yeah. I once had a friend who I was teaching with who discovered during an inset day that he could, in fact, sleep with his eyes open. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
It's always nice when you get someone.
I mean, like you, 16 years. I can remember one staff inset in a positive sense. I mean, the rest were pretty deadly, and you're just sitting there with your new kind of, planner or whatever, and you're writing notes and you're filling in the names that, of your mark book and all that sort of stuff, and you're not really listening to a word.
And then you make the mistake of looking at your watch and realizing you're 10 minutes into the 2 hours. It's about 90 degrees in the shade. There is no air in the room.
It's a tough gig. I mean, I remember we did one on spaced learning, which I loved, and I still remember some facts about Vilnius, because that was what we were learning about. We were learning about the whole kind of culture and history and things. But I did a training day. I hope I did a better job than many before me. But I actually did a training day for our staff on growth mindset, because I've just been to see Carol Dweck speak about mindsets. It's been so inspiring that I knew I needed to get this across to people, because I know that's one of the pillars that you talk about. So
yes,
what got you first interested?
Well, that's really interesting, Emily. I read the book, when I could see, so pre-2012. And I sort of thought, it's another book, and there are lots of those sort of books around. And I sort of thought, well done, Carol, you found your little niche. But I am such a fervent believer in it now, because it's worked. And I always share the story of coming out of hospital, and I did the first 6 weeks of rehab at my mum's house. And at that stage, I couldn't actually walk. I literally couldn't walk. I had a Zimmer frame, and I would get out of bed and I'd crawl like a sort of baboon, to the top of the stairs, and I'd bum shuffle down the stairs. And I remember Lindsay was a physio, and Lindsay used to hold my shoulders and say, "Come on, James, well, you've done 3 steps on your own today." Well, I was 40. I was going to be ahead. I was a dad of 4, and I remember sobbing into my mum's neck like a sort of baby, and just saying, "Mum, I can't walk. I can't walk. I'm a dad. I'm a man. I'm 40. I can't walk." And then my mum so wisely just saying, "It's about small steps." And that is what the growth mindset is, isn't it? It's so much of it is just small steps. And a year or 2 later, I rode down the River Thames on a fundraiser for I Can and I Am. And I sit on tandem bikes, and I can't run, but I can walk now. And, I keep saying, guys, listen, I spend my life encountering can'ts. And actually, I've learned to say, don't close the door, but just say, "I can't do it yet," and try and negotiate. And it works. It really works. So I'm a huge fan of growth mindset. I sort of get very passionate as I talk about it, because I just believe it to be true.
Yeah, and if people haven't come across mindset work before, Carol Dweck's book, which I believe is called Mindset.
That's right.
I remember right. It's on my Kindle. It's well worth a read, because it genuinely does make a difference.
Yeah, it does. It does.
So you go in and talk to students in schools. What's the key message that you're trying to get across? What's your big thing?
Yeah, good question. I think my presentations have got sort of 3 parts. And it seems to be slightly sort of different as to what people, younger children, I think, get more excited about my story of, it's a bit of a had it all, lost it all overnight. It's a kind of, one moment life couldn't have been better, the next moment life couldn't have been worse, and loss. And then I talk about how I try to get through, or and even 8 years on, I've still tried to use my mantra of looking up, looking forward, and looking out, UFO, So that's the first part of my story. Then I talk about the challenges of being a young person in today's world. And those two pressures, I think, are academic pressure. There's more academic pressure than there was when I was at school in the 80s. And added to that, there's the world of social media, which has really changed the way that young people relate. And those sort of time-honored traits of sitting with a mate and hugging and being there when someone's upset. And social media is alienating young people much more. And then I talk about what's the effect. And the effect is that people are now dropping their heads with a sense of, I can't, anxiety, fear. And that's where sort of depression and at worst suicide are creeping in. And then I say, guys, I really believe that we can get through this. I don't believe it needs to be as doomful as you might be feeling. And that's where my 4 pillars come in. And I don't know if you've seen my TEDx talk, but I talk about the 4 pillars, and I talk about how we inflate our balloons of self-belief. Because if we've got air in our balloon, we're resilient, we bounce back. If we've got nothing there, we don't bounce back. And hit the ground, it hurts us, it wounds our psyche, our sense of self. And I talk about how young people, old people, all of us need to feel like we belong in our families, our youth clubs, our sports teams, whatever it is, our school year group, that the world today is diverse. And schools need to celebrate that diversity and allow individuals to be themselves. Cool, uncool, sporty, not sporty. The days of homogenizing are long gone. The world is diverse. So belonging first, growth mindset second. Third pillar is the importance of people understanding that they're all intelligent. Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory, that sometimes I feel school is quite kind of linear. And if you're logical or you're linguistic, it's happy days, you cruise for exams. But actually, a lot of other kids are creatively intelligent or good with people. And actually, it's not to say when you get 17, 18, bang, I'm a loser, game over. No. And I think the school needs to help young people realize where they're intelligent. And then the 4th thing is encouraging people to dream a dream. And dreaming dreams is often beset by somebody having had a setback, a failure. And I'm a real believer that setbacks are learning opportunities for us all. And that when we have a setback, it's a springboard. And I always say, let a setback refine you and not define you. It refines you and you move forward, and you then dream a dream and you say, I would love to be a policeman. I'd love to be a soldier. I'd love to dive to the bottom of the ocean. I'm all about, don't let exams get in your way, but actually dream dreams. And if you have a dream, you will be motivated with a sense of purpose and your balloon will inflate. So that's really my message.
Yeah, we were talking the other day about I'd seen, I think it's Jen Sincera's book. She talks about new level, new devil. Like that's how I know I'm stepping out of my comfort zone and I'm doing something big and scary and audacious, because something happens. There's a setback, and that's how I know I'm going in the right direction.
Yeah.
And using those to move forward is, I love the springboard analogy. Absolutely. Yeah. So with schools then, I mean, it's all very well saying we'd love schools to be encouraging kids to be more artistic, more creative, to not homogenize them. How much of that, though, is within a school's control nowadays? And how much of that is down to, Ofsted and government interference and Progress 8 and all of the joys of that? Because I feel like not having been a member of SLT, Senior Leadership Team, for those of you not stuck in schools, it's something that I think frustrates a lot of teachers. But I've not been in a position where I had enough power to have done anything about it. Do schools have that power still, do you think?
Well, good question. I a bit like growth mindset. I think you start with small steps, and I think my real passion is to see teachers and staff and becoming places of pastoral proactivity, where a teacher realizes that their young people that they're teaching aren't just little academic robots, but they're human beings with potential. You know, that actually sitting in front of them, there might be a future world leader, or sitting in front of them, there might be I don't know, somebody who's going to lead the scout movement or something like that. And actually, we want to develop them as human beings. We want to listen to what they say, observe them, notice, and actually let us. I love the story of, I don't know what she was called, but she became a famous world-class dancer. And age 9 at school, she was late, she fiddled away, she was uncommitted, she was your sort of, oh my word, where do we go with this girl? And her parents came to a parent-teacher meeting and spoke to her teacher, full of fear on what are they going to say about my daughter this time. And her teacher said, don't worry, your daughter is a dancer. And this lady went on to become a world-class, she worked with Andrew Lloyd Webber, she made millions. She saw her as a human being. And that's what I think that, it's hard for teachers. You've got loads of kids, you've got lots of academic kind of stricture and structure to kind of cope with. But at the same time, if we engender, my elder sister works with young people, and she's often saying, no, that's her. And I just love that line, is that you're observing and you're noticing the kind of person that they are. And, it is the point that they're human beings. They're not just little robots.
It's such an important thing to recognise, and yeah.
So is that your main message when you do the parental presentations? Is that your main message to parents, to identify what their child is good at and just believe that they can?
Yeah. It is the balloon. I have a balloon. I've got it sitting on my desk now, and my balloon, my can and I am balloon. I've just got one in every pocket. There it is. I can man. And so with parents, I encourage them to realise that their sort of academic prowess does not necessarily sum them up. And that if they're not very academic, they can get to the end of their school journey and they should still have air in their balloon, and they should still have their head held high with, wow, what a big wide world. And it's a world full of hope, as opposed to a world full of, I don't know where I fit in, I don't know who I am. And that, my big thing is that we should be confident in our identity, not in our achievements, which is to say that we're confident in who we are, not in what we've got attached to our name. And we've got great results, or we've got, I was head boy, I was head girl. No, I think it's actually who we are. We know that we're a kind person, we know we're a good person, we know that we're trustworthy, all those lovely, important, crucial qualities. So my big thing to parents is, see the bigger picture, see the wider picture. I get quite sort of on my hobby horse when I stand up and I say, too many parents will sit having supper and will be talking about our son or daughter's physics or French, or how are they doing that? Have they done that prep? Have they passed that test? And you think, no, it's a bigger, wider world. Where are they intelligent? What do you think their purpose is? I think those are far more important discussions to be having about our children.
So I like the idea about blowing up of the balloon. Do you think, because we say as part of our program, 50% of learning generally occurs at home, is 50% of the balloon blowing done at home as well, or do you think it's more than that?
I think home should be places with an ambience of affirmation, and often parents And I know I can fall into this. It's so easy, isn't it? As you see your children sort of flipping up and fouling and making a mess of things and being rude or being lazy or whatever, and you just immediately jump on it like a hawk. I think that we should try and take sometimes a bigger picture. And there's a wonderful quote from an old Franciscan monk that I used to have stuck to my desk when I was a housemaster, and it was, notice everything, correct occasionally, and cherish the brethren. Which, if you're a mum or a dad, it's just love them to bits. It's love them to bits. We notice, and actually when they're teenagers, we don't always correct. That aggravates, it exacerbates, it irritates, and ultimately it corrodes relationship. But I think if we can try and do that, notice, because when it comes to growth mindsets, one of the things that we can really help our kids with, if they're taking small steps, that we notice the small step that they'd be doing to empty the dishwasher more efficiently, or water the plants, or whatever it is, we notice, and it's that little cheap, so, well done, I saw you. And I'm a great believer in authenticity of praise. I'm not empty, oh, you're great. But actually you say, I saw you do that. I noticed you do that. I was watching, I heard. I think that adds weight to the sort of the quality of input, if that makes sense.
Well, we're both sitting here nodding wildly at everything you're saying, because we have twins. They're 18 years old. One has very much a glass half full attitude, and one has my glass hasn't even been got out, let alone somebody consider putting anything in it. I mean, they've had the same upbringing, though.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, it is. How do we? What have we been doing wrong, if that's the right way of putting it? Or how should we correct?
Yeah, I think that's often a thing that I say to parents, is that we can so often blame ourselves, but actually you get the child you're given, don't you? And some are very easy and just seem to coast through. Some aren't, and it's harder work. But at the same time, a little bit like labour, I dare say, that some are just harder work to get through the system, and and that might be the system of childbirth, but it might be the system of the first, stint of their lives. And my mum will look back and she'll say, "Oh, but you were a nightmare at that stage. Oh, but you were so difficult at that stage." But actually, my dad used to always have a line of, 18 is too young to ever make a judgment about a person. It's when they're sort of 35, 40 that you can say, okay, I can now see the input. And sometimes, it's just not an immediate thing. A product you can add sugar or butter or flour to, and it's like, that's changed it. But no, it's sometimes with a human being, it takes longer. It's a longer journey. And so I think, parenting, we're all in it for the long haul, aren't we? It's just not a kind of click your fingers and it's done. And I think that is one of the challenges in today's world. The world of social media and technology, it's all just instant gratification, click your fingers, done. And that's where things like growth mindsets and taking time and emergence of a human being is very different to, solving a problem on a spreadsheet, or clicking on and downloading your new album of favorite songs. It's just so different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's very addictive. The whole social media thing is just, you watch them, their phone lights up and they have to immediately go for it. And I am almost as bad, to be completely honest. And it can be so destructive, because there are so many people out there who are just really negative and nasty, and will put those kind of negative messages out there, just, I don't know, for the sake of making other people feel bad, which is not cool. And if you don't have that inflated balloon, that self-belief, then it's too easy to take that stuff straight on board and just go with, okay, that must be true then, that must be how everybody me.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky thing to get across to them. I mean, a lot of kids with Instagram, particularly girls, looking at all of the Instagram perfection in inverted commas, because
dreadful.
filters.
Dreadful.
Yeah.
I've got a thing, having done some research on the work and the talks that you do, you talk a lot about setbacks and springboards, which I think you've already mentioned, but how, if you had a parent listening to this and they're holding a bad set of mock results that the child may have just about brought home, although slightly scared to bring them home, what's the advice to those parents where there has been a clear setback, parents feeling it and the students feeling it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I would say to parents, I'd just say they are more than academic robots, as I've said, that we shouldn't be defining them simply by their academic results. And but the second thing is, if they're really bad results and they've been lazy, I'm a great believer that with teenagers and adolescents, having been a housemaster for 10 years, the importance of timing is absolutely essential. Time the conversations, because we can have too many, and back to that sense of you're nagging, you're irritating, and frankly, every word that you say just falls off them. They don't hear a word. But actually spot that time, recognize that time, and then it's a case of, I would probably say, asking questions as opposed to instructing and informing. So how did those exams, how do you feel they went? Where do you think you can make progress? What as opposed to, what shocking results, this is, you're wasting my time, and that it's just, it will just achieve nothing. And so I think my probably my 3 bits of advice is, don't sum them up by their results. They are more than their results. The second thing is, recognize your time, and the third is approach it with a series of questions. And I'm a great believer that we should let them fall and not be constantly trying to hold them up, because when they fall, they feel the pain, rather than us taking the pain and inoculating them all the time. Let them fall, let them, I don't like the word fail, but that's when they'll feel the pain, and that's when they'll learn. And so if they get some shocking results at GCSE, and then afterwards you reflect on them and you refine and say, okay, what can you learn from that? I remember my GCSEs, I did appallingly in, and that was because I didn't work at all. And I look back on it and I think I had to retake 1 or 2, and there was a real sense of shame. But I've learned, and I will never not work again. I am now a hard worker. But you can go through and you can just say, oh no, I can't be bothered. It's, but actually when you've hit the ground and it's hurt, you've learned the lesson. Does that roughly answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's often more about us as parents than it is about the children when we're feeling the need to nag, because you're watching them and they're headed for a fall.
Your
parental instinct kicks in. Don't do that, don't climb so high, don't run so fast, all of the things that we've been telling them since they were little, because we're trying to protect them. But actually in the longer term, it's probably more important that they have
I had a really interesting conversation. I had a really interesting conversation with a lady who was the pastoral lead at Bath Further Education College, where after GCSE, so it starts with year 12, but it's basically pulling in a lot of those type of children that have failed all their exams or been excluded from school. So quite a tricky cohort of kids. And she said to me, the biggest problem is when parents don't let their children fall and fail. We live in a failure avoidant world, don't we, where we just want everything to kind of go tickety-boo and on they go. But actually, we mustn't forget that when things go wrong, we learn, and they must do the learning. And sometimes we've got to journey with them.
Yeah, I had the poster in my classroom that said FAIL, first attempt in learning, and it was a useful message because they are all very failure avoidant. I think we all are, but the bigger the risks you take, the further you go, and you've got to not be afraid to try stuff.
It's often those guys, isn't it? You read the books about people that have gone a long way, and often they've their educational journey's been fraught with problems, but they've developed somehow that resilience, that ability to bounce back and just think there must be another way. And it's really interesting, books about dyslexia as well, and the benefits of having dyslexia, because you learn that there is always another way. And that is what the world requires now, is creativity and entrepreneurialism, and not to see a roadblock as no, I can't go any further. You can work your way around it or over it or under it or whatever. And I think that's what, we are living, aren't we, in very, very different times, and the skills that young people need to learn are so different to what we had to learn.
Yeah, it's funny you should say all that, because we've literally just interviewed Joseph Valente, who won The Apprentice in 2015. But so Paul and I met, we started teacher training at the same school on the same day. And that was about 6 months after he'd been expelled from that same school.
Yeah.
And has now, at 15, and has now gone on to be Lord Sugar's business partner. He's exactly as you said, he fell down. And he picked himself back up, and his resilience is astonishing. And that was what did it for him. That's what made the difference. If he'd had a more normal, traditional school journey, he couldn't be where he is today.
Yeah.
And one of the stories I quite liked from him was that he hated learning. He hated everything about school. He was told what to do and which class to go to because he couldn't do physics, so he'd go and do art, which he hated. The second he was actually allowed to learn what he wanted to learn, he hasn't stopped. He still reads, he listens to audiobooks. He's always trying to get better at everything. And he got to the bottom. He failed it, and he's now spending every moment trying to make himself better.
Well, I'm listening to a book. You'll like it, Emily. It's called Step by Step, and it's written by I don't know if you've come across him, a chap called Simon Reeve, who does those travel programs. So he's just done a travel journey from North America, from sort of Alaska all the way down on a train and buses and stuff to Cape Horn at the bottom of South America. I mean, this guy at school was brought up in Acton in West London, and failed every exam, was robbing houses, was a real badass, couldn't get worse. And he got a job, I think, doing the sort of paper round or something like that. And with the money that he earned, I think he left London for the first time, aged about 18. He had never been anywhere else. Living on his estate in Acton, he got a train up to Edinburgh, went up to Glencoe, and he climbed a mountain. And when he was climbing the mountain, it was step by step, and he was told it's dark, it's wet, it's cold, you're not dressed. But he got to the top, and then he basically went back to London. He got a job working in a postal room, letters. Absolute boss of the pile. But the boss saw him, a boss saw him, a boss saw him. Before he knew it, he was, much higher in the postal room. And then he moved to a newspaper, same thing. And then he becomes a travel writer. And then he becomes a travel presenter. And it all starts with that sense of step by step. And that's what he proved to himself on the mountain. As he just walked up step by step, he got to the top. And I just think, again, amazing story. How do we develop, what really interests me, how do we develop those mindsets in people? And I think that it's those kinds of things that I think education should be asking itself now is, how can we develop people for the world, the uncertain, very different world that they're going into than the world that we went into, which was frankly very linear, wasn't it? It was, you got a job and that was the job you did for the rest of your life. And now it's not like that.
Yeah.
So different.
Well, that's, I think, a perfect place to say thank you very, very much for your time. So many inspiring messages in there.
Yeah.
And so much to think about, certainly from the parents' point of view that will be listening to this. So thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.